But a lot of times I was the only female in the room. I was the only Black woman and Black person in the room a lot of times. And so I think one thing that surprises people when I talk about my military service and the challenges that I faced was the internal pressure on myself to be better, to work harder, to speak louder just so I wouldn't be overlooked. There was so much in me. I felt like I got to work longer hours. I got to always be here. I got to work harder. I got to always be proving myself, even when I got to that very high rank. Women especially are always, especially minorities, and I can only speak for me, a lot of the pressure came from internal.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectors, and welcome to episode 272 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In today's episode, I have an interview with Lila Holley. Now, Lila Holley is a U.S. Army combat veteran and a multiple award-winning author and genius behind the Camouflaged Sisters brand. Camouflage Sisters empowers military women and women veterans to take back the narrative and ownership of their stories. Lila believes there's no one better to tell these stories than those who've lived them, and she is creating an amazing platform that celebrates military women and women veterans with her online community, virtual and live events, retreats and getaways, and workshops. Through this community, military women connect with each other, access resources, and share their stories. Camouflage Sisters is more than just a bunch of books and stories. It's a movement, and Lila and I have a fantastic conversation about that later in this episode. But first, let's hear comments from recent episodes. Over on YouTube, because the audio feed is posted to my YouTube channel at youtube.com/Mark Leslie Lefebvre, Kat Farrow posted for episode 268, Neurodivergence in the Creative Process with October K. Santarelli. Kat said, "Thank you both. Hope Toby teaches this at Superstars," and she's referring to Superstars writing seminars in February. "Need to work on my rewards list and try the timer thing." Thanks so much for that comment, Kat. I'm pushing and hoping that October can do this at Superstars in February. And yeah, the timer thing, I need to do that myself as well. Great. Again, I love the fact that people are listening to the episodes and getting a benefit and inspiration from my awesome guests. And over on Twitter, Edwin Downward commented for episode 271, which was Valerie Francis and Melanie Hill on the Story Nerd podcast. Edwin said, "At the recommendation of Mark Leslie, I've been checking out the Story Nerd podcast. Aside from the problem of not having watched most of the movies they're analyzing, I need to hear more of their style before I make a stay or cut decision." And so two interesting things from that, Edwin, is, I make that decision a lot because there's so many great podcasts out there and you can only listen to so many. So it's kind of like, is this one I'm going to keep listening to or not? I think for me, I'm a fan of the Story Nerd podcast, but I've probably only listened to maybe 33% of the episodes, something like that. Well, I don't know exactly the number because I didn't do the math. I didn't take off my socks and shoes and count all my fingers and toes. But I've only listened to the episodes of the movies that I've watched or programs that I've watched as well. So that's one of the interesting things about Story Nerd. It is you get more benefit from something that you've actually listened to. So if there is a movie you've been wanting to watch, what I recommend you do is, watch the movie and then listen to the episode, because that's where the learning really, really happens. But I do agree, there's definitely a time when you're looking at new podcasts and wondering, which ones am I going to add to my weekly listening? And I sometimes go and batch listen to a bunch because I listen to certain ones every single week, and in other ones I let them go for several weeks, and then I go and I sort of binge listen to them. But that's just sort of a pattern of how I go through podcasts. How about you, dear listener? How do you decide which podcasts you subscribe to, listen to, which ones you selectively dip in and out of? I'd love to know. Feel free to comment, comment over Twitter at Mark Leslie or on this episode over at starkreflections.ca. And the final comment does not come from this podcast. It comes from my work in the industry. And this came from Harley Christensen over on Twitter. And one of the things I love that Harley does is quotes from interviews and audio and podcasts. And Harley was quoting me and said, quote, "If you're worried about your sales, we advise you to stay the course, find a way to practice patience, and employ long-term thinking to your strategy as we're heading into the fall and holiday seasons." And I just love the service that Harley does listening to podcasts. This was for a blog post over at drafteddigital.com, and it was related to my recent self-publishing insider or industry insights for Q1 and Q2 of 2022. It was published on October 10th, and there's an accompanying video where Jim Azavino and I have a discussion about the stats, and then a few days after I wrote a more detailed blog post outlining, sort of the trends that I've been tracking in the industry. But what I love what Harley does is sharing these sort of tidbits from various sources and podcasts. And it's always great if you follow Harley on Twitter that you can actually always find some really, I guess I would call it like curated content, curated stuff. And so Harley's handle on Twitter is at Mischievous Mally. So that's the word mischievous and then M-A-L-I. And that's great if you're looking for really great inspiration. And Harley seems to be paying attention to and listening to a whole bunch of stuff across the industry. So great word to the wise if you're looking for insights, etc. Harley's really curating some great stuff. So thank you for that, Harley. And that is it for comments. As I mentioned, you can leave comments over at starkreflections.ca, at me on Twitter. I'm at Mark Leslie. Email me. There's the YouTube channel. All kinds of ways to leave your comments because I really enjoy the comments, because the comments sort of let me know what you're reflecting on as you're watching the episodes. What are you finding benefits from? What is it making you think about? Because it is a lot more interesting when it's a discussion rather than a broadcast. Even though, yes, I know I'm recording and broadcasting out in the world, but it's really great to know a little bit about what's going on as you're listening to that content on your end. So thank you guys so much for the comments. And now a word about this episode's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Findaway Voices. Findaway Voices is an audiobook platform that allows you distribution and production options. It basically has access to more than 43 retail and library channels, now including Spotify in the US for a la carte audiobook sales. If you're looking for a narrator, you can use Findaway's marketplace online, or there's more of a DIY sort of process where you put out an RFP and somebody at Findaway will help find from thousands of narrators out there, between 5 and 10 of the best for you. So there's a surcharge for that. Of course, you can waive the surcharge if you're going to Findaway Voices from Drafted Digital, from your Drafted Digital account. Click on audio, takes you over there, copies all your metadata for you automatically, and waives that setup fee for that process. Or you can bring your own audio. I love the choice. I love the options. I love the flexibility that you get with Findaway Voices. I have taken to purchasing my content directly from my narrators, paying for it all up front, and then using Findaway for distribution, being able to create codes to do free giveaways for audiobooks. If you're listening to this and you're interested in one of my audiobooks, tell you what, email me, Mark at markleslie.ca, and so long as it's one of the books I have the rights to, I can create a code for you so you can download it for free on the Authors Direct player, which is a free downloadable on iOS and Android devices, because that's just one of the cool things that you can do with Findaway Voices. You have access to chirp deals as well, especially priced deals over at Spotify, Barnes & Noble, Apple, and Chirp. But those are just some of the things you can do when you're working with Findaway Voices. And the sky's the limit. Use your creativity. Use your imagination. And if you want to see how you can leverage your imagination for a powerful audiobook experience for authors, you you can check out Findaway Voices over at starkreflections.ca/Findaway. And now for my personal update. So this week on October 11th, or October 10th was Canadian Thanksgiving, October 10th, 2022. And so on October 11th, because Tuesday is the day of traditional book releases, I released the copy of The Canadian Mounted, A Trivia Guide to Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. It is virtually the same size of that mass market edition of the book, The Canadian Mounted, that Del Griffith, played by John Candy, was reading in LaGuardia Airport in the airport when Neil Page and Del Griffith first officially meet. Ironically, because this is a blooper in the book, when you look at the ticket that Neil has early when he's in the office and looking at the ticket, it says he's going to JFK. But the exterior shots that you see are of LaGuardia Airport. And also, when you're in, I think when you're in Wichita and you're looking at the flights from Chicago, it says LGA, which is the code for LaGuardia Airport. So obviously that ticket was the blooper. Everything else was LaGuardia. So kind of a cool thing. But I have over 150 pieces of trivia and updates and bloopers and interesting behind-the-scenes notes for the Canadian Mounted. And I'm just so thrilled that after years of dreaming of this book and actually starting to work on it really seriously about a year and a half ago, it's just been great to see it come to completion. I kind of had to stop working on it. I could have kept going, but I wanted it to be, it's 192 pages in print, because I wanted it to be pretty much the same spine size, so that if you're looking at this book, it looks almost like the book that Del is holding, with just a few fine changes that I put in there myself. So yeah, I'm kind of excited. I'm kind of pumped about the Canadian Mounted, and I suspect it's probably going to be one of those things that is probably a gift for people who know, oh my God, you're a fan of planes, trains, and automobiles. This is great for, something you can enjoy. I got a note from my good friend Julie Strauss. I sent a physical copy to her because I remember us bonding early on in our friendship. I think one of the ways we became friends was bonding over sharing quotes from the movie. And she was talking about reading it with one of her daughters, and it just turned into a quote fest of them quoting lines from the movie, because again, there's quotes and stuff like that in the book as well. So that's been good. So the Canadian Mounted's out. I can now focus on the next project, which again is co-authoring Hex in the City with Julie, and we have some work to do in October, because the writing's gonna happen in November, come hell or high water, and maybe hell and high water will come, because that's kind of what's going on in the world lately. But that is it for my personal update. So why don't we get into this interview with Lila Holley of Camouflaged Sisters. Lila, welcome to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Mark. I'm really excited to be here.
I am thrilled to have you here, because when we met in Colorado just a few weeks ago, when I started to hear about what you were up to, and this happens to me all the time when I talk to fascinating people, I went, oh my God, I want you to share that with my listeners. I want them to know all the cool things you're doing. So let's start off with you yourself. Before we get into Camouflage Sisters, let's get into you and your life as a creative person.
Yes. Well, first off, I'm a veteran. I served 22 years in the Army. And then after my transition, I have this fabulous life of being an author and running this women veterans organization called Camouflage Sisters. It started with the author journey, and we have created a platform for women veterans to share their stories. We have 8 books published with over 140 ladies who share their incredible stories of service.
Wow. So I want to get into Camouflage Sisters, but I want to talk about you and your writing. So you're a veteran. You've obviously experienced in military. Yes. Were you always interested in writing and authorship, or did that come after you left the service, or how did that work?
Well, I remember when I was in high school, I was really shy and really nerdy and, kind of trying to find my place like every other teenager. And I loved writing, and I felt like I had a special gift. My English teacher really enjoyed my stories that I created, and even encouraged me to submit one of them to a major magazine because they really enjoyed my writing so much. And so that really kind of set the foundation for me to love it, not knowing it could ever be like a career choice, but just loving it as an outlet, you know.
Cool. So then you had your own experiences, obviously, in the military. What was the genesis of Camouflage Sister? What was the genesis of you wanting to help other veterans share their stories, etc.?
It was that transition after I served 22 years. It was really tough. You know, if you know any veterans, you know that transition period of leaving the military and recreating your life outside of the uniform is challenging emotionally. And I wasn't prepared for that. Like, I really didn't know that was a thing until I was deep into it, you know. And so I resorted back to things that I knew helped me when I went through tough things, tough challenges in life, and that was journaling. So I used journaling as an outlet. From there, I wanted to share my experiences moving through that transition to help other veterans who may or may not have had like a strong support system. So I self-published a book that kind of talked about that journey and shared that story with other veterans so that they knew that they weren't alone in that process, that it was just a part of the transition process, that emotional journey. And then from there, I began to ask other veterans a lot of questions of their transition process and learning that it was a part of the process. And then also learning about their incredible stories, other women veterans specifically. And so when I got out, I was looking for books, and there weren't any books about that transition journey. There weren't a lot of books about women veterans and their experiences. And so as I heard more and more stories, I was like, oh my gosh, who's capturing these stories? They're incredible. And so I got the idea to create Camouflage Sisters to share our stories.
And so that first book that you released, was that after a whole bunch of conversations, or did you know the book was going to be a thing while you were having those conversations with people?
No, that was me, like me understanding books as a resource,
Okay.
you know, and then using those journaling inputs and those journaling excerpts to pull together my experiences and the tools that I used to push through that tough transition.
Okay, so you have an affinity for creativity, for writing, right? Like, you had that, you returned to that when you transitioned back to civilian life. But I'm imagining that many of the women veterans that you're talking to don't have those skills. They have stories, they have deep, heartfelt, emotional tales to tell, but not the way to tell them. How do you work with them to get that into the books that you're creating with them?
That's a great question. And so a lot of the women that I speak to, they love what I'm doing with Camouflage Sisters. They are like, oh my gosh, this is so incredible. It's brilliant. And then they'll say things like, oh, well, I don't have a story. I never deployed, or I didn't do this, or I didn't do that, and my career was all good, or whatever. I don't have stories. And I always tell them everybody has a story, even if your career was all good, somebody needs to hear that. You know what I mean? The young girl who's contemplating joining the military, she needs to hear the good stories too. And maybe you didn't deploy, but you were a single mother in the military. That's a story. Like, how do I survive that? Women are dealing with that every day. And so everybody has a story. And so I encourage them to look at the strength in your story. Never minimizing your service, especially for women veterans. Never minimize your service. There's always a story that you can pull out of your experiences in the military and in life to help somebody else who's coming behind us on that journey of service.
Wow. So this first book, you had this book, you put it together. The Camouflage Sisters, was that the title you first had in mind, or did that come later on? How did that because you have this whole online community, you have other people you work with now to help you with this. I'm just curious as to how that went from a book into this entire movement.
Yeah, so the first book I created was a solo project that was called Battle Buddy, because in the military, when you join, they assign you a battle buddy and you kind of go through basic training together, and that's your accountability partner, and they always know where you're at. Like, they're accountable for you and you for them. So that's why I chose the title Battle Buddy, because it just used the book as a battle buddy as you move through transition. But Camouflage Sisters came once I introduced the idea to my publisher. I went back and prayed and meditated, and I was like, I need a good title for this thing. Like, what is it? Lord help me, give me something.
Yeah.
And so I started writing what I was, what was down coming to me. And then I wrote down Camouflage Sisters. And so I went back to my publisher and I threw out a couple of titles. She was like, no, I don't like that. Oh. And then I said Camouflage Sisters. She said, oh, like, that's it. That's it. I love it. That's it. And then she helped me, the books are, we have a Camouflage Sisters, 3 books that are Camouflage Sisters. And so they have subtitles where those books are tailored specifically to a specific topic.
Right.
So the first book was Revealing Struggles of the Black Woman's Experience. Our second one is Silent No More, which deals with trauma. And then we have a leadership book, From the Eyes of Senior Military Women. So those are, and then we have a series within Camouflage Sisters called Behind the Rank. So that's how that came to be. So we have, like I said, 8 books total, but I wanted to tell the behind the rank story, because people will see women who serve in the military, like I made it up to a pretty high rank, and people will see that and they'll be like, oh, you must have had a great career, you must have blah blah blah. They don't know what it took to get there. They don't always know the stories behind the rank that we accomplish in the military. There's some great stories, but there's some struggle stories too. Like there's some really hard stories, some really hard things that women go through to survive a military career. And so I wanted to be able to tell that story. That's how Behind the Rank series was birthed as well.
I can only imagine, because I'm a very privileged middle-aged white guy. Women have it tough. People of color have it tough. Then you combine that with military, and I imagine if we think we have it hard, there's this whole other level of challenge and difficulty, and probably, I imagine there's probably oppositions you didn't even realize that would exist, or challenges that you didn't even realize it would exist. Can you share maybe just some of the things that an average civilian would have no clue about?
Yeah, the thing about this, like you said, as a woman coming into a predominantly white male career field, first off, and I was military intelligence, and I don't think it get any whiter than that, like, unless you're infantry, like, but I loved my job. I really did. And there was a lot of opportunity for growth. And like I said, I made it up to a high rank, and really had a lot of great opportunities afforded me because of my field that I was in. But a lot of times I was the only female in the room. I was the only Black woman and black person in the room a lot of times. And so I think one thing that surprises people when I talk about my military service and the challenges that I faced was the internal pressure on myself to be better, to work harder, to speak louder, just so I wouldn't be overlooked. There was so much in me to where I was like, I felt like I got to work longer hours. I got to always be here. I got to work harder. I got to always be proving myself, even when I got to that very high rank. Women especially are always, especially minorities, and I can only speak for me. I put a lot of pressure on a lot of the pressure came from internally. That makes sense what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, for sure. And that's something you might not even expect, is that you're
Exactly.
putting pressure on yourself.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think women across the board, because I hear it a lot, women across the board, we feel like we have to work harder, longer. We lose time on the job to have babies and start families. And imagine in the military, you're like, do I have a child or do I take command? It's so much.
Oh my God, yeah.
You know what I mean? It's so many pressures on a woman and women love serving. Like, there's some awesome women leaders serving in the military, and they're great leaders, but they have so much pressure that they put on themselves. And I meet a lot of women who have served 20, 30 years, and they've forsaken family, having a spouse, having children, because they were building and moving throughout their career. And it's kind of sad, but a lot of that comes from internal. And I think sometimes people don't think of that, like the internal pressure that we as women put on ourselves.
Right. I think when I think of the sacrifice, I think saying to somebody who has served in the military, particularly women who've served in the military, thank you for your service, doesn't even come close to appreciating the sacrifice that happened along the way, because you have to work twice as hard to get what it is. It very much like in standard Western society, you work just as hard or twice as hard for half the pay, or is it very similar in terms of the structure?
Well, the great thing about the military is everybody makes the same pay.
Really?
Like,
Even for women too? Oh, that's phenomenal. Well, there you go.
That is one thing. That's one thing that I would say.
One good thing. Awesome.
Yeah, the military is, I'm telling you, they're ahead of their times with that. If I'm
a man in your position, when you were a senior ranking officer, would have made the same amount as you, even though you were a woman.
Absolutely.
Wow,
if we're the same
I had no idea.
If we're the same rank and we have the same number of years in, we're making the same pay.
Oh, that's fantastic. See, there's some good news.
Yeah. And that's why I tell, young people today, like, the military is a good option if you want to get a skill, if you want to learn discipline, and you just want the experience. It's a great option. It really is for, to kick off life as an adult. It's a good option. It's still a good option.
So how did you get a hold of the women that you, and I like to say collaborated with on these books, because it kind of feels like a collaboration, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. How did you get a hold of them? Was there some sort of reach out? Did they find you? How do they find you? How do you find them?
I use social media.
Okay.
I use social media, and the women that I serve with, a lot of the ladies in the first book are women that I served with. One of my mentors, my good mentor and friend, she joined me on that. She was the first one I asked to join me on that book project, the first Camouflage Sisters book. And when she said yes, and I explained to her what I was doing, I knew I had something special on my hands when she said yes.
Right.
I felt like she had a great career. Like I said, she was my mentor and friend, and I was like, wow, what kind of story could she possibly have to tell? Other than a great, a good story, you know what I mean? But she's written in 2 of my books now, and she has always shared some great valuable tips in the sharing of her stories. So.
Oh wow, that is wonderful. So I think one of the stories you hear from people who have served is sometimes it's difficult to talk about some of their experiences. Even if they haven't, gone into the field, into battle or anything like that, there's still challenges and difficulties that make it difficult to talk to a civilian about. Well, obviously, because you have insider, right? You were there, you understand from an inside, so you have that. But how do you get them to open up about some of these things that may be difficult to share?
So our books, we don't bash the military at all. Like I said, I served 22 years. I'm a retired veteran. I'm very proud of that title. And the military was good to me while I was in uniform, and they've been just as good now that I'm a veteran out of the uniform. And so we don't bash the military. So that's one thing I tell them off the top. We're not here to bash the military.
Right.
We're here to share our stories, share our truths from our perspective, and to leave our readers with a message of hope and inspiration and a lesson learned. Because there's women still serving today. There are women who are considering serving, but coming behind us, who may get a hold of one of our books, and they need to know, if I'm a single mom and I'm in the military and I'm preparing for deployment, what does that look like? How do I survive that? Give me something if you've experienced that and you've already gone through that.
Right.
And so that's what I tell them. Now, the harder stories to share the ugly truth, share your ugly truth, and share, especially in that instance, share your lesson learned and share something with the reader that they can take away from that if they ever find themselves in a situation such as that. Okay. Because we do touch on some very tough topics, and it was funny to me when I first started going around with the books sharing about Silent No More, and the topics that we discussed, like domestic violence in the military, sexual assault and harassment in the military. And people are like, domestic violence? Really? And I'm like, you got to understand, the military is a reflection of society. Like, I mean, they don't breed people to join the military. We're not a special breed of people. We grew up in society just like you did, and we just happen to choose the military as a career option. So if you got creeps in society, you got creeps in the military, and you're going to have those issues. And if it was not so, we wouldn't have the Uniform Code of Military Justice, right? So we have our own military law code and to govern our forces. And so, yeah, it happens, And
Right.
so, unfortunately, that's the reality of it. And so, to get them to open up, the main thing I want them to be, to think of your reader. I always have them to think of their ideal reader. Like,
Right.
who are you writing this for? If you're writing it for your younger self, think of her. If you're writing this for a niece, or have an idea, 40-year-old veteran, woman who's already served and she's a veteran now and she's trying to figure life out. Picture your ideal reader and write for her. And that seems to help them a lot. I did have one author who she wrote out her story, and when I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, she is still very much hurt by this experience. And so I got on the phone with her, and I explained that to her. I said, right, I said, I could tell you're still hurt by this experience. It still affects you very much so. I said, but this is a story that needs to be told. Like, this is something that, toxic leadership is really something that needs to be talked about. I told her to go back. I said, and think about it. Think about the lesson that you learned in that instance of dealing with toxic leadership, and write that story for that young woman who's thinking about coming into the military. And imagine her running up on some toxic leadership. How did you come through that? What was the lesson that you learned from that? And how can she maneuver through that if she finds herself in the same situation and grow from it? And she was like, okay, I'll do that. And she went back and she wrote out a beautiful story. It's the same story, but just from a different vantage point and a different point of healing. And so my main thing for the ladies is, because these are tough topics that we, they kind of draw up some very, very tough memories sometimes. They have to be in a good space of healing from that experience to be able to really share that story effectively with our reading audience.
So there may be instances where somebody's not yet ready or able to
Exactly.
share the story, but it sounds the kind of, I was thinking of two different things when you were sharing that it is, I love there's always a positive spin on that. So you're not bashing the military. You're trying to look at how people got through and survive something. But the other thing I think that's really, really critical, and it's kind of in that looking at your reader and thinking about your reader, is I imagine people are picking up these books and saying, oh my God, I'm not alone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. I've gotten so many testimonies from readers, and they're like, I had to put that book down. Like, it drew up so many emotions in me. And first thing, it let me know that I was not alone in my experiences.
Right. I love
And
that.
so I said, well, that's why we write. That's why we write, and we don't ever want you to feel alone. And we want you to look at the other side of healing through that experience. But yeah, you're right.
Wow, love that. So you have these books that anyone can pick up. They're available pretty much everywhere.
Yes.
But you also have a community. You have an online community at your website. Can you talk a little bit about that, and how does a person get involved in the community?
Yeah, so our community is open to women primarily. uh, uh, Solely women, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, no men. We have a lot of men supporters, but just women for the community.
Men can be the silent supporters.
Yeah.
Okay, so
We
you have to be female, obviously with experience.
Yes, so we are looking for women who are currently serving in the military, those who have served in the military. Even spouses are welcome, and family members. So we have some caregivers.
Oh, so military families. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Caregivers. We had a mother of 2 military service members who wrote in our last book.
Oh, that's great.
And
okay.
a caregiver, a young lady who takes care of her father, who is a veteran, and she's been a supporter since the first book.
That's so inclusive. So yeah, because they're affected.
Yeah.
It's their life, right?
Yeah, the military is a lifestyle, and people, and that's why getting those other perspectives is so important. So the mother, she shared about the military family and how important that was during some tough times in her own family, how they supported her daughter who was serving at the time, and just reached out to the whole family, including her as the mother of the service member. And then the young lady who's the caregiver, she talks about the caregiver from the caregiver's point of view and how lonely that can be sometimes. People don't know, like, it is that, oh my gosh, that's just a whole nother community that we really need to be looking out for, because they're isolated a lot of times. They take care of the veteran all the time. And the VA is now taking a look at how to support the caregivers, but there's so much still to do on their behalf to take care of them, to make sure that they're getting breaks when they can, make sure that they have resources available for their own well-being, because being a caregiver, full-time caregiver, it takes a toll on you mentally. You put all your life into caring for that person, and we all have an expiration date, unfortunately. So
and there are a lot of people who are caregivers who have a way to not feel alone anymore. They understand that there's other people that are going through it, and that's critical, right? Is making people feel that they're not alone, that there is someone who understands what they're going through. So you've got this community. You talked about social media. How do you reach out? What specific platforms are you on, and do you have any regular programs or scheduled events and things like that?
Yeah. So we are on Facebook, we're on Instagram and LinkedIn. We have a LinkedIn page as well. And we do, on our website, we have members where they can log in. So we have a back end for members only, and it kind of mimics Facebook platform, where you can leave posts and have a profile and all that stuff. Right. So we post the information in there and encouragement and stuff in there as well. And then we meet on Zoom monthly for our sisterhood chat. That's our safe space to share and to talk about self-care a lot, to check in on the ladies and make sure everybody's doing well mentally. It's really a safe space for them to talk about whatever is on their mind. But we focus heavily on self-care. And then we do Sisterhood Getaways. We've been to Vegas together. We've taken cruises together. we have a good time, so we work hard and we play hard too. So
I love that.
And so when we get together on those trips, we also have moments where we do, many workshops and talk about the importance of journaling. We talk about the importance of self-care and things like that. What else we got going on? Yeah, those are the main two things where we get together. And so we're working on more projects too, book projects. So I'm excited about that as well. But we do use social media a lot to reach our target audience. Word of mouth is like our best advertisement. Women who find us and find what we do of value, sharing about us.
Well, I have to quote this, and I took this off your website because this was just so powerful. We value the voices of women and create a safe space for sharing our stories. The military connects us, but it's our stories that make us a sisterhood.
Yes.
I love that.
Thank you.
So for anyone who's listening who says, "Oh my God, that's me. I need to be involved." How can they get involved? How can they become a part of the sisterhood? How can they become an active member of the community?
Yes, go to our website, camouflagesisters.org, camouflagesisters.org, and I'm sure you'll have the spelling, because camouflage is kind of a tricky word to spell. So we'll have the spelling for you exactly. Yeah. But go to our website. All the information is there on the sisterhood, how to join the sisterhood. And then we're also on Facebook as Camouflage Sisters LLC. Okay. Camouflage Sisters LLC is our Facebook page. We're Camouflage Sisters on Instagram, and then Camouflage Sisters on LinkedIn as well. And they can always find me, inbox me, and ask me any questions. I'm available. Awesome.
And I'll make sure that there's links to all of those in the show notes at starkreflections.ca. So Lila, we met at Master's Creative Writing program with a specialty in publishing. And that's where I met you, and I first heard part of the story and went, "Oh my God, we've got to talk." Why did you want to go back to school? Why did you want to go get the master's? You've already done you've already had all these accomplishments. What was it that compelled you to want to do that?
Well, I wanted a program because I wanted to do it right. I was published through a hybrid publishing company, and they taught me so much. Like, they really taught me so much But they did a lot for me. So there's
Right.
still a lot for me to learn, and so I'm always being asked by other veterans, especially women veterans. They want to write books. How can I help them? And like I said, I'm a very spiritual woman, so God was kind of pushing me in that direction to publishing, and to help people publish their stories. Coming from a point of view as a writer myself, and understanding the writing process, and I'm very protective of that process and of our stories and how important they are to get out to the world. So I feel like one of my strengths is coaching and kind of pulling out the best and the best version of someone's story out of them. And so I wanted to be able to bring that to publishing. And so I did some research. When I ran across the program, I was like, oh, this is perfect. It's only 12 months because I don't have 3 or 4 years to sit in school. Who has that type of time? I just don't. And then I spoke with the instructor, Kevin Anderson, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is definitely the program. I love him and I love what he's done and what he's doing with this program. And so I was a little nervous about the technology piece of it, but I kind of worked my way through that. And I'm excited to be in the program after being out of school over 20 years. Can you imagine? Like literally 2002, I got my bachelor's degree when I was in service. But yeah, and so many life lessons between now and then.
Right.
But I felt like it was the right program, and I'm very excited that classes are starting back up, and to just all that I'm going to learn in this program to really be able to help my target audience and my community to really get their stories out to the world. I feel like these stories are precious and they really need to be told.
Awesome. Lila, please remind my listeners where they can find out more about you and more about Camouflage Sisters.
Yes, camouflagesisters.org is our website. Camouflagesisters.org is our website. We're also Camouflage Sisters LLC on Facebook. We're Camouflage Sisters on Instagram and Camouflage Sisters on LinkedIn. And you can find me as well, Lila Holley, Holley. You can find me on all those platforms. Well, on Instagram, on LinkedIn and Facebook.
Awesome.
You can inbox me, just connect with me, ask me any questions. But if you are a person who served in the military, male or female, we have incredible stories to share. And if you are being pushed or being prompted, or people have told you need to write a book, like really consider it, because we really need to get our stories out there to the world. They need to be inspired by us.
Well, Lila, thank you so much for the details, the inspiration. Thank you so much for what you're doing to help other people share their stories. It was really a pleasure to get to speak with you today.
Thank you so much, Mark.
There is something really powerful about story. We know that. We're writers. There's something really powerful about connecting the right book to the right reader, because you're really connecting two souls, two hearts, two minds. The writer has something they want to express, share. The reader is connected to that person. So the very act of writing, the very act of reading is an acknowledgement that we're not alone. There have been studies that have shown that readers are far more empathetic. Empathy is being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. When I think about writing, I think about the power of story, the power of books, the power of what we do. And I think about what Lila is doing. There are people who have given and sacrificed so much of their lives to serve in the military. And of course, as a black woman serving in the military, Lila knows all too well the additional challenges and the additional struggles that come with that. But then there's the struggle, the big struggle of coming back to civilian life. She had to go through that. She had to understand what it was. Instead of just going through it, instead of just working her way through it, she rediscovered journaling and the power of what can come with that. But then even more than that, she empowers others to tell their story. I love what she said about everyone has a story, and she works with other people. Potentially, everyone does have a story in general, but these folks who are coming from the service and are trying to transition back into a civilian life is an additional struggle. And Lila is making sure the people who read the books are not alone. So again, not everyone has to share their story, but she wants to empower them the ability to share their story. But just having the books and the platform out there allows people to realize that they are not alone. That's one of the most powerful things we can do as writers. Remember that. When you're thinking about the books you write, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be nonfiction and memoir. It doesn't have to be self-help. It doesn't have to be spiritual. It doesn't have to be any of those things. You can be writing complete escapist fiction, mystery, thriller, romance, whatever it is. What you're doing is you're connecting with another person. You're reminding them that they're not alone, because there's probably something in that fiction that they are connecting with. A character, a moment, a scene that is just so real, so pertinent, so important to them. So my reflection is obviously the power and just magnificent beauty of what Lila is doing to enable and empower others. But I want to remind you, dear listener, that as a writer, you're engaging in that power every single day when you set to put words on paper for other people to read, to remind them that they are not alone and that there is a connection, a powerful, life-altering connection even, that can happen when the right reader discovers the right words and that beautiful connection of knowing that you're not alone anymore is created. Never forget that. And I know it's hard. We have hard days. We have days where we're frustrated and we deal with things like we're blocked from our writing, or our sales aren't where they used to be, or any of those things. Never forget that power that you hold that can change someone else's life for the better. So thank you, dear listener, for being a creative spirit, for being a writer, for being somebody who's interested in getting their words out. The world needs you, and the world needs your writing. The world needs your story. So thanks again to Lila, my awesome guest. Thank you, dear listener, for listening to the podcast. I also want to thank my awesome patrons who support this podcast over at patreon.com/starkreflections. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for listening. If you want to support the podcast, you don't have to become a patron. Just feel free to leave a review for the podcast wherever you're listening to the podcast, or better yet, share this podcast with somebody that you think would find value, that maybe you think would find that connection, that you think would be reminded that they are not alone, and nor are you. Thanks for being part of this reflective community. Thanks for being a listener. And so until next week and next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.
I know you, don't I? I'm usually very good with names, but I'll be damned if I haven't forgotten yours.
You stole my cab.
I've never stolen anything in my life.
I hailed a cab on Park Avenue this afternoon, and before I could get in it, you stole it.
You're the guy who tried to get my cab. I knew you, yeah. You scared the bejesus out of me. Come to think of it, it was awful easy to get a cab during rush hour.